Carla, it's been a big year for you, an exciting year. What will you remember about 2022?
Yeah, it has been, it's been quite a year, 2022. Of course, taking on the leadership, making that decision in February. I think one of the biggest takeaways from this year will be the time spent on the road, getting out and talking to people right across the province. The immense privilege to sit down with people at their kitchen tables, in the coffee shops, and hear about their concerns, but also their hopes and dreams in this province. It has been a real privilege.
What have you learned on those trips and on those having those conversations with people?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the main things, and we learned this really early on, I talked about this even in the leadership, was in so many places the only thing that people knew about the Saskatchewan NDP were things that they had heard from the Sask Party. And the importance, my takeaway from that was the importance of getting out and finding those connections, meeting with people where they live, and reintroducing ourselves, really, finding the common ground and our shared love of this province and our hopes for the future. And I think that has been really successful for us. We've been really pleasantly surprised by the reception that we've received, but also those conversations have informed what we've been doing in the legislature. The concerns that we've brought forward, the priorities, are really built with that information that we got from people when we were out doing that outreach.
And speaking of priorities, what are the things that people tell you, and what have you brought into the legislature to say, hey, this is what people want, this is what the message they're sending us, and we think these are the things that people need right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the highest things on the list, and we heard this everywhere, was the cost of living. People feeling like they were falling further and further behind. We hear high-level messages from the government about growth and growth that works for everyone. But when we're out talking to people, more and more people are feeling like they've got less at the end of the month. I know recent polling found 60% of people in this province feel like they're worse off than they were last year. And people feeling that they're working harder but falling further and further behind.
When you've mentioned the government having an unexpected maybe surplus or something they didn't project back in March, now looking at, you're talking about affordability and people need more. The government sent out those $500 affordability checks. Your party and your caucus has argued that more needs to be done. Mm-hmm. What could the government be doing with that surplus? Mm-hmm.
Well, not only did it take 9 months for those checks to get out, we saw a government that in the midst of a 40-year affordability crisis, record inflation that we haven't seen for decades in this province, actually chose to pile on 31 different fees and rate hikes, and then also increased power rates by 8%, energy rates by 23%. Holding off on those rate increases that have impacted people right across the province. A lot of businesses we've talked to, they feel that they were able to scrape by through the pandemic only to be hit with huge power rate increases. Had people feeling like they didn't know if they were going to be able to continue on. And we see very real impact of some of those increases. The highest food bank use increase in this province anywhere else, the highest mortgage and arrears of anywhere in the country. When you have a government that's talking about growth and how wonderful the economy is performing, that should translate into some material benefit to people in the province, and we're not seeing that for most people.
There's been arguments as well. You can take a sip of water, I'll ask my question. Mm-hmm. There's been some arguments that from people in the healthcare field that some of that money needs to be put into healthcare right away. Mm-hmm. The government has said, well, this is a year-to-year thing. We don't just put money in. But we've seen some spending on recruitment, retention, and planning to bring more people in. What could the government be doing on the healthcare side to help the situation in ERs and with hospital service disruptions?
Yeah, well, our health critics, Vicky Mowat and Matt Love, have been making those connections with healthcare providers for months now. And, you know, most recently we saw the provincial auditor raise some very, very significant concerns about retention specifically. The fact that we lost 600 net 600 healthcare workers over the last year. You know, certainly recruitment is important, but spending dollars to keep people in those healthcare roles is essential. We've seen other provinces, and we've heard this raised by healthcare workers, when other provinces are making that investment, when we see British Columbia, for example, spending money to stabilize family physicians, that becomes harder and harder to retain those healthcare workers here. First of all, they may leave for other provinces, which we've seen in too many instances, or in many cases, we're seeing healthcare workers disgruntled, feeling disrespected, feeling not heard, burnt out, actually choosing to leave the profession altogether. So, you know, recruitment is important, but that spending that money to retain those workers who really are feeling like they're at the end of their rope is something this government should and could have done. As has been mentioned, they're sitting on windfall revenues. This would be a time to stabilize those positions, to ensure that people can access primary care, which is something that, you know, ability to get a family doctor is very difficult for people in the province. We saw in Saskatoon, not a single family doctor taking on new patients, and, you know, ensuring that our healthcare system is there for people who need it. And in too many instances, that simply isn't the case right now.
We heard from the premiers a few days ago wanting the Canada Health Transfer to be increased. There's been talk about, you know, whether that money should be tied to, you know, a plan, or that should be tied to specifically spending on healthcare, so it's not just a chunk of money that the governments in any province or territory to decide what they want to spend it on. Mm-hmm. How would you like to see that money, if it's increased and sent to the provinces? Should that be spent, and should it come with conditions? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, you know, overall we support the call for an increased investment from the federal government. I think where there's some frustration on our part with our provincial government is there are things they can be doing now and should be doing now to make those investments. Like I said, stabilizing primary care, family doctors, use of nurse practitioners so people can access basic health care. Looking at the, you know, investments in the funding model, working with physicians, working with healthcare providers to build that. So yes, increased investment from the federal government, but too often we see a provincial government here who points at the past or points at the federal government and neglects to do the things that they could and should be doing right now to provide some relief and to actually move the dial here in Saskatchewan. That's a real concern.
Speaking of pointing the finger at the federal government, the provincial government introduced the Saskatchewan First Act this year. They made a big deal about it. What is your take on the Saskatchewan First Act? Mm-hmm.
So this was their flagship piece of legislation. This is what came out of their closed-door meetings that they undertook, their separation tour that they undertook this summer. You know, this is a bill that, by the minister's own admission, really doesn't do anything. It has been met with, obviously, a lot of concern about the lack of consultation, particularly with Indigenous and Métis leaders and communities in the province. You know, the fact that we didn't see it passed, I think points to the fact that this was a document that wasn't really materially intended to do anything other than, you know, send some sort of a signal. It didn't materially change anything in the province, and the fact that they didn't put it as a priority to pass this fall is, I think, shows that, you know, this was a bill designed for political purposes rather than any material purpose.
We've seen the FSIN, AFN come out against the Saskatchewan First Act and the Alberta Sovereignty Act. where do you stand on I guess the position that those organizations are holding, and do you support their opposition to it?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, it comes as no surprise that the outcry against these two bills, two very different bills in Saskatchewan and Alberta, but that lack of consultation with Indigenous and Métis communities comes as no surprise. This is this is something that we've heard expressed in many different places around the province, certainly in Alberta as well. One of the things that the government could have done was take this bill to committee, schedule it for committee, and have some of that consultation that should have happened prior to the bill being tabled. The fact that we saw them, not schedule any time in committee with this bill, I think is curious and very curious for a bill that was their flagship of this fall session.
What talking about your party now? How have you worked with your caucus, and how have you seen that in your new role, going from a critic and an MLA to now the leader?
Mm-hmm. When I took on the leadership, one of the things that I have focused on throughout my career is that team building. And we've got a very strong team of MLAs. I've done a lot of outreach on my own, but also our critics have really taken up that outreach, those connections within their critic areas, within their constituencies. I think the connection that they have in their critic areas is how effective they've been has really been shown with the number of people we've had come through the legislature to talk about those issues, around healthcare, around affordability, connection with the beef pricing and the grocery costs. I'm very proud of this team that we have, and the work that they've been doing, connecting and really showing themselves as knowledgeable within their critic areas, and being the kind of leaders that we would hope to have in government, really connected to the concerns within their critic areas and bringing forth some of those proposed solutions.
Now, it's the end of 2022, and 2024 is not too far away. Mm-hmm. I know you're thinking about it. You've mentioned that. When do you start focusing on that? I know you don't want to lose focus of what's happening in here, but how do you blend those two things, the priority of holding the government to account and doing your role in opposition, but then also trying to build towards the next election? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it will be here. 2024 will come quickly. Continuing with the outreach, I think is going to be a focus for us as a party and as opposition. Talking with people, connecting with people who want to put their name forward to be candidates will be a focus in the upcoming months. Looking to build those solutions, which is, we've been propositional on a number of things over the last year, but continuing to build those solutions with people in the province so that we are seen as, government in waiting, that we have an exciting alternative to a government that is increasingly showing itself to be out of touch and not connected with the real concerns and hopes that people have in this province. You'll continue to see that as a focus.
The Saskatchewan party, polls pretty good. The premier's numbers are solid. How do you combat that? How do you break into that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I said, I've been really encouraged by the reception that we've had in communities right across the province, continuing to show that there are alternatives to this government. A government that we do hear is increasingly out of touch with the concerns that people have in the province. Connecting some of the very real pressures that people have in the province, say with affordability, to decisions made by this government. Again, the decision to increase fees and taxes and utility rates at a time when people are already struggling, and showing people that there is an alternative. I think that's really important, that we continue to demonstrate that we are a party that is serious about forming government in 2024, and that there are things that can be done to ensure that, you know, when there are high-level numbers, you know, indicators in an economy, that actually translates to quality of life for people, where they can, you know, get a quality education for their kids, where they can access health care, where you don't have a government that is piling on fees and taxes and utility rates when people are having trouble paying their mortgages. I think we continue to make those connections and show people that not only is better possible, that the Saskatchewan NDP will be the ones to deliver that better for people in this province.
What does it mean to you to be the first woman to lead the NDP, you know, in a permanent role?
You know, when you take on a role like this, often you just, you know, dig in and get into the work that there is in front of you. When I'm really reminded of that, you know, I had a letter sent to me shortly after I was elected from quite an elderly woman in the south around home, and you know, she expressed that she didn't think this is something she'd ever see in her lifetime. You know, to see it through her eyes, I think fills me with a lot of gratitude, but a real sense of responsibility. Often when you speak with young women, I've had you know, young people in the office, to see women in roles of leadership, or that representation regardless, is really important in politics, for people to see themselves reflected in roles of leadership, is very important, and something that I cherish and take that responsibility to be a role model very seriously.
Thanks for your time, Carla. Those are my questions.
That's it. Thank you.